Thursday afternoon lunch and learn class. It's so nice to see so many of you who are with us. And I look forward to the continued rich learning that we have been doing over the course of this year. I don't think there's anybody who's new on this call, but since we're live streaming, I just want to let people know that the materials that we are going to be studying are prepared from Rabbi Jonathan Slater from the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. I did notice, all of you, that the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, starting in the month of June, is going to be offering a Torah yoga class. It's a free class. In addition to the free classes that they're offering on meditation, this is another class. So how many of you have never been on the Institute for Jewish Spirituality website? Come on. I've been teaching all of this material for all these many weeks, and none of you, or most of you, have never been on. You need to go onto their website and check out the range of programs. They're so good. And the people who teach are superb. They are excellent, excellent teachers. Institute for Jewish Spirituality. Check them out. Sign up for their Torah yoga class. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay. I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully, I have so many documents open. Hopefully, this is the one. Yes, it is the one. All right. Let's begin with our blessing for Torah. Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'divrei Torah.
Okay. So the texts that we are doing today come from, again, Rabbi Slater, and they're on the holiday of Shavuot. So let's take a look at what we have in store for us. I think I have 3 texts that we're going to be looking at today that deal with Shavuot. The first one from Yismach Yisrael, the teachings of Israel of Chortkov, and he is the scion of Rabbi Israel of Ryzen, who was a great Chassid all the way back to the Maggid of Mezerich. Who would like to read this first text for us, beginning with all of the grains? All right, I saw Sandy first and then Carol. So Sandy, you'll read this first text. Carol, you'll read the next text. Could everybody see it? Is it big enough for everybody? Are you good with it?
I'm fine. You want to speak for others? Okay, Yismach Yisrael, teaching of Rabbi Yisrael of Chortkov. Okay, a scion of Rabbi Israel of Rizin, and so of Rabbi Dov Beir, the Maggid of Mezrich. That's quite a introduction.
Yes, he has quite a...
he's got real chops, as they say.
An outstanding yichus.
That's better word. All of the grain offerings were to be matzah, except for the chametz bread offering of Thanksgiving sacrifice and the 2 loaves offered on Shavuot. The sages taught, I created the Yetzer Hara, but I also created Torah to be its antidote. If this was so, then before the giving of the Torah, there was no antidote to the Yetzer Hara, and it was only possible to serve God with the Yetzer Tov. But now that Torah has been given, the antidote to the Yetzer Hara, it is possible to serve God with both Yetzerim. That is why at Passover, which took place before the giving of Torah, it is all only matzah. But at Shavuot, once Torah has been given, they could also offer chametz.
All right, clear, right? Everybody understands that. We're ready to move on to the next one.
No.
Yes. It's amazing how the Hasidic text, when we first read it, sometimes is obtuse and needs a little bit of massaging in order to be able to see the wisdom that actually is hiding behind the language. And That's what we're going to do. We're going to massage this text so that we could understand the wisdom and the lessons that it offers to each one of us as we prepare for this holiday of Shavuot. So let's start with the first sentence. All the grain offerings were to be matzah except for the chametz of the Thanksgiving. If you're not muted, I would suggest you mute yourself just to make sure that we don't have any of the background noise until you're ready to speak. So all the grain offerings were to be matzah except for chametz of the Thanksgiving sacrifice and 2 loaves offered on Shavuot. So let's understand that first sentence. What's going on there? What are we talking about? Anybody know? What's a grain offering? Okay, so there were
Anything that grows.
So there's a series of offerings that Leviticus outlines that people bring to the temple. So they're hierarchical. So you can start with an offering of a cow or an ox. And if you can't afford a cow or an ox, then you give a goat or a sheep. And if you can't afford a goat or a sheep, then you give a chicken or a turtle dove or some kind of bird offering. If you can't afford that, then you give a grain offering. So the grain offering, which is called the mincha offering, is the smallest of the offerings. And therefore, the assumption, at least according to the Rashi, is that it was offered by people that, were on the lower economic scale. So what this statement is simply stating is that when the grain offering was offered in the temple, it was offered in the form of matzah as opposed to bread. Except twice, when it became the Thanksgiving offering, which is one of the many offerings that the book of Vayikra lays out. You can offer an offering as a chatat, a sin offering, an asham, a guilt offering, a zevach shlamim, a thanksgiving offering. So there's all these different types of offerings. And whenever you gave the grain offering in the category of a thanksgiving offering, it always was in the form of a loaf of bread, not matzah. And on Shavuot, each holiday there's an offering. On Passover, Sukkot, Shavuot. So on Shavuot, it's bread and it's not matzah. So of course, the Hasidic master is asking the question, why of all of the holidays, when it's regularly matzah, on Shavuot is it different? Why on Shavuot do we give it as in a different category? That's the issue that's being raised, and then he's going to come up with an answer that we'll read in a second. Paul, go ahead.
I seem to recall that chametz is symbolic for pride and haughtiness and the puffiness of the self. And so the matzah was lacking that arrogance. But I still don't understand why it would then be offered on Shavuot.
Okay, so
they're talking about the Yetzer Hara, and I see that as chametz.
Okay, excellent. So you're offering a really important point. What you're saying is that perhaps the reason why anytime somebody would give a grain offering to the synagogue, it was in the form of chametz and not, it was in the form of matzah and not chametz, is because it was supposed to symbolize the way in which the person giving the offering was approaching the altar. And if chametz represents pride and arrogance, that's not the way that we should come to the temple giving a sacrifice to God. We should come in a form of humility and of recognizing the source of all of the good that exists in the world, the source of all that exists in the world, good or bad, and that is God. And so our sacrifice should reflect the manner in which we approach that offering. That's what Paul said. Does everybody understand that? Is everybody clear about that? Except twice, when it's a Thanksgiving offering and on Shavuot. So let's first take a look at it when it's a Thanksgiving offering. Why do we not come to the temple for an offering as a Thanksgiving offering in that kind of abject humility, in that state of lowliness? Well, perhaps it relates to the nature of a Thanksgiving offering. What's the idea of a Thanksgiving offering? Why would somebody give a Thanksgiving offering?
Gratefulness.
We're grateful for our bounty.
Exactly. We feel overwhelmed by all that we have. And it's hard when we feel overwhelmed by all that we have to come in a state of feeling that sense of humility. So the sages or the Torah understands that you can't ask somebody to be in a state that is in an emotional state that isn't reflective of where they really are at. And when you're coming into the temple, thanking God for all that you have, then the sacrifice needs to reflect that kind of overwhelming sense of gratitude. And bread is a better symbol of that overwhelming sense of gratitude than matzah is. So that's why we have what for a Thanksgiving offering, bread. But now the question is, why on Shavuot? On Sukkot, on Pesach, it's still matzah. Why on Shavuot is it bread and not matzah? That's the real question at hand. And the answer, of course, is going to be a lesson to each of us about what's the connection between the holiday of Shavuot. What does the holiday of Shavuot celebrate?
Gather.
The giving of the Torah.
So it celebrates two things. It celebrates the gathering of the harvest, and it celebrates the giving of the Torah. According to the Torah itself, which of those does the holiday of Shavuot celebrate? In the Torah, what is mentioned?
Agriculture.
Yes, only agriculture. There is no mention of the giving of the Torah. So the rabbis who are writing this many, 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 many generations after the sacrificial system is no longer applicable. So they have to connect the idea of Shavuot to the significance of the giving of the Torah. And they're doing that through this tiny little a distinction in the Torah that says on Shavuot, we offered bread instead of grain. What's that connection? So let's go back. Is everybody still with me? I know this is a hard text, but are we following? Okay, so now let's go back and reread this to try to make sense of it. So the sages teach that the Yetzer Hara was created. What does that mean, the Yetzer Hara was created? Who's I in that sentence? I created the Yetzer Hara.
Hashem.
God. Okay, what does it mean that God created the Yetzer Hara?
The survival instinct.
Good. When God created human beings, God created us with two inclinations. A Yetzer is an inclination. God created us with an inclination for taking care of ourselves, a survival inclination. If there is a wild animal that we are hunting, it turns around and wants to hunt us. What do we have a tendency to do? Run away, right? That instinct to survive in a place of danger is essential to our ability to fulfill the mitzvah of choosing life. That's the highest ideal. Choose life. And sometimes in choosing life, we need to take care of ourselves. And so God created humanity with that important instinct. Then why is it called the Yetzer Hara? It doesn't seem to be a raw instinct, the instinct for survival. Why is it called Yetzer Hara as opposed to just Yetzer? Paul?
Because the presupposition is that it just concerns yourself and leaves out the needs of the other.
Okay, so one possibility is that in in our own state of wanting to survive, we sometimes forget about others. Have you ever seen videos of people where they are in a contained building that all of a sudden is on fire, and the rush to get outside, sometimes even in that rush, trampling on other people who are not lucky enough to have gotten out first? There is that sense that we are very quick to take care of ourselves, even sometimes at the expense of others. And then, of course, we always read about those unbelievably heroic acts where people are willing to jump in front of a bullet, dive on a grenade, giving their own lives for the sake of saving other people. So we know that not only is there that instinct to survive, there is also that instinct to put my life behind other people, because we value saving others even more so than value saving ourselves. And hopefully we live with that tension all the time. Now, most of the time, we don't live in the experience of either running out of a burning building in order to save ourselves or jumping on a live hand grenade to save others. That's not normally the state of our being and our existing. We usually are dealing with, that extra piece of pie for me or somebody else, a few extra dollars to invest in the stock market versus to give to the homeless, a inability to listen to another person fully because we want to be able to add our opinion. Those are the areas more often than not where we find the distinctions and differences between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov. They're not survival kinds of issues. Is that good? Are we all clear? Anybody want to? Yeah, Ziggy.
Is Lashon Hara considered Yetzer Hara?
Probably, because usually when we speak Lashon Hara, we are denigrating somebody else at the expense of elevating ourself. And oftentimes the elevation of the self is just to show somebody that we know something, that we have greater power. And that usually comes from a sense of insecurity, of fear, of not being seen, of not being noticed, of that survival instinct that says, I need the world to revolve around me. Okay, so back to the first sentence, right? The first sentence, the sense that we're looking at. God says that I create humanity with the Yetzer Hara, the inclination to survive, because I know they need it. Otherwise, humanity won't take care of themselves. But God is also saying in parentheses, I know that if left unchecked, the Yetzer Hara will become so powerful that humanity, that individuals will only worry about themselves and they won't worry about anybody else. That's how strong the Yetzer Hara can potentially be. And if the Yetzer Hara is that strong, we need to figure out a way to give humanity the means to dial it back. Give it to humanity, but also give them something that will allow them to contain it, to control it, to manage it so it doesn't overwhelm their existence or their children's, their parents, their spouses, their friends, their communities, and everybody else's existence. And what is the antidote according to this sentence? Torah. Now, the question is, how is Torah the antidote to the Yetzer Hara?
Love your neighbor as yourself.
There you go. What is Torah? What does Hillel teach us? What is the essence of Torah? Everything else is commentary. Now go and study. Right. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Or as Hillel says it, don't do unto others as you wouldn't want them to do unto you. Everything in Torah is justice. Love your fellow. That's the antidote to the Yetzer Hara. Is that an easy thing to achieve? Is it easy to love our fellow?
Yeah.
Well, it
Not
depends
all
on who
No.
the fellow
Time.
is.
It depends who your neighbor is.
Sometimes it's easy to love them. Sometimes it's very difficult to love them. Sometimes it's easier to love the stranger than it is to love the people who inhabit our homes. And all the time we need Torah to remind us of the tension that exists between our Yetzer Hara and our Yetzer Hatov. So that's yeah, Ziggy.
So all the things that have been done by our forefathers and foremothers, like with Jacob and all the things, the nasty things that have been done, and with the brothers, with Joseph, did our rabbis justify that as the fact that there was no Torah and there was no Yetzer Hatov to help them make the good decisions?
No, they don't. I mean, of course, there are occasional moments, but they're usually around ritual practices, like when Abraham runs to give the angels food and drink. And if you look carefully at that story, you'll notice that he mixes milk and meat, that Abraham doesn't make a distinction between what he's serving them. And so, the Midrash says, well, it was before the Torah was given. But at the same time, the Midrash also says that the Torah was given even before the Torah was given, that the Torah is the blueprint for God's being able to create the world. So that our ancestors, even though they didn't have Torah, they had Torah. But that's not usually the excuse that's given. The gist of what you're asking, Ziggy, is that the rabbis beautifully understand that what makes our ancestors compelling heroes and heroines is that they're all flawed. They're all human. They all suffer from the very same things that we suffer from: petty jealousies and envy and pride and insecurity and all the things that cause us to do the things that sometimes we regret doing. They don't try to make our patriarchs and matriarchs into superhuman, ethical individuals. They're quite okay with flawed characters because they find that it's easier for us to connect to people who are flawed than people who are perfect. Right? There's no such a thing as perfection. The only thing that's perfect is God. So we continue to struggle as our ancestors continue to struggle. And even within our struggling, we can still become the patriarchs and matriarchs of the next generation.
Thank you.
Okay, so are we good so far? Is everybody understanding so far this text? So let's dig a little deeper. So the sages taught, I created the Yetzer Hara, but I also created Torah to be its antidote. We still don't know what this has to do with the chametz versus the bread on Shavuot, so we have to keep going. If this was so, then before the giving of the Torah, there was no antidote to the Yetzer Hara, and it was only possible to serve God with the Yetzer Hatov. So this basically leads to Ziggy's question. If Torah was the antidote to the Yetzer Hara, doesn't that imply that every single human being, every single Jew before Mount Sinai only served God with the Yetzer Hatov? Because God would not give human beings something without giving the antidote. We following?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It seems to make sense. That's the logical assumption that I have to make if I'm making the first statement that God gives the Torah and the Yetzer Hara at the same time. Yet in reality, we know from a historical standpoint, the Torah isn't given until Mount Sinai, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after all of our patriarchs and matriarchs lived. Yeah, Leora, make sure you unmute yourself.
Yes.
But from my understanding, Yetzer Hara was actually created as at the third day. I'm sorry, at the sixth day when man was created.
That's the difficulty. If the Yetzer Hara was created in Breshit when humanity was created, why doesn't God give humanity, Adam and Eve, in that moment, the Torah? Why does God wait so many generations to give the Torah? You're absolutely right. That's the conflict that the Hasidic master is raising. Yeah, Leora?
Not only that the Yetzer Hara was created, we see right away at the story of Bereshit when brothers kill each other.
Yes.
That's really
Yeah, 100%. And that's why the first statement from the sages in Kiddushin doesn't make sense. And that's what the Yismach Israel is challenging. He's challenging the statement of the sages in Kiddushin, even though he brought it himself. So it's really a straw argument because he brings it as a straw argument, knowing that he's going to defeat it in a second. So now, what does he say? He says, but now that Torah has been given, the antidote to the Yetzer Hara, right now that we're sitting at Mount Sinai celebrating Shavuot, it is possible to serve God with both Yitzarim. That is why at Passover, which took place before the giving of the Torah, it is only matzah, but at Shavuot, once Torah has been given, they could also offer chametz. Okay, he doesn't do it, does he? He doesn't really solve the problem that he raised, does he? He doesn't present the question that Leora, or the answer to the question that Leora and Ziggy are offering. What happened before the Torah was given? There was no solution. And yet we know that our ancestors didn't serve God with only Yetzer HaTov. Or maybe they did serve God with the Yetzer HaTov, but we don't understand the nature of Yetzer HaTov, right? Because there's no good answer that's given in this text. So instead, let's try to understand what it is, the point that he is trying to make. And what's the point that he's trying to make? The point he's trying to make is, on Passover, when did Passover take place? It took place before the giving of the Torah. It is only matzah because the people of Israel were in a state already of being in Tov. Now, we know that's not true. We know that's not true because what happens when they get to the moment where they have to cross the sea? They complain. And what happens after they cross the sea and they have no water? They complain. So clearly, right, they were not in their Yetzer HaTov. So underlying all of this is the idea that Torah is essential to our ability to manage our Yetzer Hara. Right? We just cannot live. If you look at my this first question, it is curious to think that in the temple matzah was plentiful and chametz was limited. Could it be that under the influence of the grandeur and mystery of the temple, we would only act from our Yetzer HaTov? Perhaps the world needs chametz and the Yetzer Hara. Meaning what?
Could it be that it's automatic? They had both Yetzer Hara and Yetzer HaTov. They really didn't act specifically for one or the other. They just acted. There was no thinking or choices. Once they got that officially, then they didn't just get it as something to do, but giving us a chance to say, okay, I'm going to act Yetzer HaTov or Yetzer Hara. And they had choices that they could make.
Excellent. Good. In other words, to be fully human, to be fully and completely human is to recognize that we are constantly living with this Yetzer Hara energy. And in living with this Yetzer Hara energy, that's not a bad thing. In fact, not only is it not a bad thing, but it potentially can be a good thing, because it allows us to struggle to know the difference between when we are serving out of our Tov and when we are serving out of our Ra. And for those of you who have been in my Musar classes in the past, you know that's what we're constantly trying to work on. We're trying to work on when are we serving out of our Ra and when are we serving really out of our Tov. Because a lot of times we think we're actually in Tov and we're not. We're actually in Ra energy. And what is the means by which we can determine whether or not we're really in Tov energy? Looking at Torah, using Jewish lessons of life, studying the Torah, coming to classes, being part of a connected, committed Jewish community that has Torah as its centerpiece for judging and evaluating all of our actions in life. That's why this holiday of Shavuot is so important. Neil, yeah, you had your hand up?
Oh, yeah, I'm just thinking, I mean, one of the reasons was for Yetzer Hara when leaving Egypt. They didn't have time for Yetzer Tov. You have that pressure there, and the chometz takes a little bit longer to make than
That's true. You're absolutely right. When leaving Egypt, the only thing you're focusing on is your sense of survival. There's no place for the Tov to exist. Leora.
Well, I'm having trouble understanding the fact that Yetzer Hara is when we come to the temple to sacrifice. One would think that people are in a regret stage when they're coming to give offering, or in a very happy, like you said, Thanksgiving. So where is Yetzer Hara comes in when the offering are in the temple?
So there are people who choose to serve a Jewish community, a synagogue, who choose to serve the Jewish community out of a strong desire to want to better the community and the people who are part of the community. And then there are people who serve the Jewish community, who want to serve the Jewish community because they want their own recognition. They want to serve the Jewish community so everybody can look at them and say, hey, look how important Richard Camras is. He's the president of Temple Beth Tuchas. And, he's the president of Temple Beth Tuchas because he cares so much about the synagogue. But in reality, all that Richard Camras does is show how great he is that he's become the president of Temple Beth Tuchas. And everything that he does and everything that he talks about is to show how great he is, how much money he gave, and how he was able to do X, Y, and Z, and the great staff that he brought to the synagogue, and that the synagogue only survives because Richard Camras has done all of these great things. Do you know people like that? Have you come across people like that? And it doesn't even have to be about the synagogue. It can be in all sorts of places. Ziggy.
Well, what you've described is clearly a negative quality of that person. And it goes hand in hand with Yetzer Hara, which means Ra means bad, negative. So for many of us, and I think Leora's got that issue and I have the same problem, we associate Yetzer Hara with negativity, not something positive. So that's why there's a difficulty here associating Yetzer Hara with an temple offering. But it seems to me like over the years, especially our sages, have come to interpret Yetzer Hara differently. Unfortunately, they're still using the word Ra, which means bad, and that's where the difficulty comes in.
I think you're right. I think there is nothing wrong with doing something where there is some benefit to you. And doing something with some benefit to you is not necessarily raw. It's not necessarily bad. It only becomes bad when it excludes others. When the desire that you have to do good overwhelms the desire you have to allow other people to do good. And you're right. The challenge in this using of the term Yetzer Hara is that we hold on to the definition of it only being bad. In and of itself, the rabbis say our Yetzer Hara is essential. Without our Yetzer Hara, we wouldn't get up in the morning and be driven to make a name for ourselves. We wouldn't have the drive to have children. We wouldn't, have the drive to do so many of the things that we need to do in order to survive and build community. It's only when it goes unchecked that it is negative. So we need that Yetzer Hara. And we need it when we serve in our communities. We need it when we help in a soup kitchen. We need it when we, want to do good for other people. We have to acknowledge it, recognize it, see that it's a part of our being, but also know that it could very easily get out of control if it's not managed. Right? I go with Ziggy and we do Habitat for Humanity, and we build a house and we paint and we clean and we do all these other kinds of things. And as we're getting ready to take the picture, I want to stand in the front and I want everybody to see what I've done. And then I sit on the bus as we're going back, and all I do is I talk about all of the amazing things that I did while I was building this house. Now, my intention to go and work for Habitat Humanity was a good thing. But somehow along the way, I got lost in my own glory. If I didn't have that desire to want to do good, where I have to give up some of my own free time for the sake of somebody else, right? Some Yetzer Hara energy is driving me to do that thing in the first place. It's not just Yetzer HaTov energy. Then I have to balance it with my Yetzer HaTov and not let my Yetzer Hara energy get the best of me. All right, let's move on to the next text, which the last two are much easier than this first one. So now that we've spent 40 minutes on this first one, let's go to the next one, which is a quicker one. Carol, will you read the next one? Carol, where are you?
Now I'm back.
Okay.
Hidushei ha-Re'im, Rabbi Isaac Meir Rothenberg, Altar of Gur.
By the way, just as an aside, how many of you know Werner Frank? So Werner Frank has traced his ancestry back to Meir of Rothenberg and even beyond, all the way back to the 13th century. But he's a descendant of Meir of Rothenberg. That's just a little note, an aside.
Okay, whose father, Rabbi Israel, was a disciple of Levi Isaac of Berdichev and Rabbi of Gur.
Yes, he was one of the founders of Hasidism. So go ahead, read in the English.
There you are to bring your burnt offerings and other sacrifices, your tithes and the offerings of your hands, your votive and freewill offerings, and the firstlings of your herds and flocks.
Okay, so we are commanded in Deuteronomy. By the way, this portion of Deuteronomy 12 comes right before the portion that we normally read on the second day of Shavuot and on the last days of Pesach and Sukkot. We actually read from Deuteronomy chapter 14 and go all the way through to the end of chapter 16. But prior to what we read is this passage. You bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, and the offerings of your hands. so the question that he's asking is, why does it need to specifically say the offerings of your hand? Aren't the burnt offerings and the other sacrifices in your tithes, your votive offerings, your free will, aren't those the offerings of your hands? Isn't it your hands that did all this work in the first place to bring this offering? What's the significance of these connected to the first fruits? So continue reading, Carol.
Rashi interprets this phrase to signify the first fruits. This teaches that we are to raise up the work that our hands perform, to dedicate them to God, as in the phrase, let my hands be dedicates to the one who made.
That's a typo.
Dedicated.
That should be dedicated. Whoop.
Okay, to the one who made them. This is related to the first fruits. Those fruits that are grown through effort and labor are brought to the altar. That is why the festival of Shavuot, the holiday of receiving the Torah, I called the festival of the first fruits. It is only through Torah that it is possible to attain this spiritual degree, to raise and elevate and dedicate to God all of our deeds.
Okay, so it's still complicated, but a little bit easier than the last source. So we are supposed to bring to God the offerings of our hands, the first fruits. What's the implication of the first fruits? What does that mean? When you think first fruits, what does that literally mean?
Best stuff.
Good, right? That was the whole issue with Cain and Abel. Abel brought the best. Cain tried to get by with second fiddle. When it comes to gratitude, we need to bring our best self forward. When we want to show that we appreciate God or somebody else, we don't give them our second best effort. We give our first best effort. It was pretty easy to determine what your first fruits were when we were farmers. Why was it easy to determine our first fruits?
Well, when you harvest it, you know it goes back to the thing in the Talmud that talks about you don't put your best fruits on top and then you sell the whole barrel and the bad stuff's underneath. You know what's good.
Exactly. When we're producing it from our hands, we know what's good, and therefore it's easy to set that aside and bring it to the temple. We're consciously making a decision to say, even though this is the best grain, the best chicken, the best goat, whatever it is, I am not going to keep it for myself. I am going to send it to the temple to give over to God, to the priests, to the Levites, to the poor, and all those other people.
So does that go for the larger piece of cake too?
That goes for the larger piece of cake too. Yes, when it's my birthday and I say I want the piece of cake with the cream or the cutting with, the sugary thing or whatever it is, right? Because it's mine. The challenge, right, is to say, no, I want the person who made that cake to have that first piece. But when we're living in a non-agricultural time where we're celebrating the holiday of Shavuot and we're not bringing first fruits to the temple, the underlying question that this text is asking of us is, how do we bring our best self to Shavuot? How do we bring our best self to worship, to the experience of celebrating a holiday? How do we do that?
I have a question.
Yeah, Ruth Ann.
Okay, so they're talking about first fruits, what we're growing. At the time that we're talking about, they also had the animal sacrifices. So your best would be bringing the fruits, not the animals.
No, it's a catchphrase for all of it. Best animal, best fruits. And now what he's saying is, because we don't have animals or fruits, what do we have instead? Right?
Kavanah.
What do we have, Paul?
Kavanah, the intention to draw close to God and give thanks to him.
Exactly. We have our own intention.
Right.
What we now have to replace the physical aspects that we were bringing is our own sense, our own personhood, our own intention. How many times do we come to the synagogue, right? Because we just come to the synagogue because it's a thing that we do. How many times do we light candles because, oh, it's Shavuot, we light candles. Oh, it's Shabbat, it's time to light candles. Now, that's better than not doing anything at all. But here we're talking about people that already are making a commitment to certain behaviors and certain practices. Now, what you have to do is step it up, right? Enter the game with your head on. Really ask yourselves, how am I going to approach this holiday with the fullness of my being? Judy.
I see something that maybe is not correct, but I love the first sentence that says, we are to raise up the work that our hands perform. And I think a lot of times we don't raise up the simple things that we do that have a lot of value and dedicate them to God or whatever. And so I really like that part.
Yeah, here's a perfect example as it relates to the holidays. So when you are eating dinner on Tuesday, a regular Tuesday in your house, and you've prepared the meal, how often do you set the table with a tablecloth, put whatever you've prepared on a serving platter, bring out your finest dishes and silverware, dress yourself up, and sit down to that meal? My guess is probably not very often. But if you were having guests over to your house, would you do that? Would you just slop the food out onto the table and dress as casually as you might if nobody was in your house, if it was just you? Probably not, right? You would not serve others the way you sometimes serve yourself. This is inviting us to approach minimally the holiday of Shavuot as if we are welcoming a guest into our home. We do that every Shabbat. Who's the guest that we welcome into our home on Shabbat?
Sabbath bride.
Yeah, the Sabbath bride. Right? If you had the real Queen of England coming to your house for Shabbat dinner, how might that Shabbat dinner look differently than if you were just imagining the Shabbat bride coming to your house?
Bangers and mash.
How would you dress differently? What would you do to set up your house? How would you set your meal? So this is one tiny example that I just got from Judy's comment.
But there's a challenge there. And the challenge is that when we had all 5 kids at home, we'd have dinner around the table every night. We'd set the table, we'd do that. We may not dress up. But now that it's just the 2 of us, okay, it's more challenging, although 90% of the time we'll sit at the table, we'll have, serving platters and whatever, but there's an intention to do it that way, to have gratitude for what we're doing. But that's a difficult thing to do.
Of course, and that's why Shavuot only comes once a year, and that's why Shabbat only comes once a week, because we recognize, the tradition recognizes that it would be very, very difficult for human beings to maintain that level of dedication and kavanah every single day of our lives. Couldn't do it. It's just impossible. But can we do it occasionally? Can we do it once a week? Can we do it 4 times a year? Sukkot, Shavuot, Pesach, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Are there moments in our life where we can approach this in a different mindset and say, today I need to give my first fruits, the work of my hands? Right? That's the challenge. Not every day, but occasionally. That's what this text is presenting to us. So I present it to you, right? The holiday of Shavuot begins tonight. Forget about it for 2 days, just one day, tonight and tomorrow. What can you do that will give you that sense that you are giving the best of you to the celebration of the holiday. And for some, it may just be, hey, normally on Thursday evening, I sit in my pajamas, curled up in bed with a good book, or watching a Netflix show. And maybe tonight, what I'll do is I'll dress up in a shirt and I'll turn on Zoom and I'll be part of the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, something I've never done before, but that's bringing my best self. That's bringing my commitment to serving this holiday of Shavuot.
Yeah, but the challenge is how many of us can stay up till midnight?
So do it for 1 hour, right? 2 hours. It's actually not till midnight. It's really only till 11:30. All right, let's take a look at the last text quickly.
Why is Shavuot all about dairy? I mean, you said to do a nice dinner and platters, but we're going to eat blintzes. I mean, why would you?
Well, there's no good explanation, Lauren, for why you serve dairy on Shavuot as opposed to meat. There's many explanations that are given. One of them has to do with the fact that the Torah wasn't given, so the laws of kashrut weren't given. The other is that Torah is like like the honey and the milk, the sweetness that we gain, and therefore the food that we reflect should be in the same way. But it doesn't matter. Whatever it is that we eat, however it is, whether it's blintzes or quiche or a hamburger, the issue is, can we create a festive approach to the way that we might do Thanksgiving or Hanukkah or a Seder? Can we do that on Shavuot? All right, the last text, we don't have a whole lot of time, so I'll just read it quickly. For every festival, we are instructed to bring among all of the other sacrifices a goat for a sin offering. But for Shavuot, no such sin offering is brought, and no mention is made of a sin offering. The reason is that on this festival, everyone is likened to a convert, who is in turn like a newborn, free of all blemish. So Shavuot, like the book of Ruth that we read, tries to get us into the mindset that we all come to this in a moment where we're choosing to accept Torah, the way that Ruth chose to accept Torah, that we're being born anew, born again. Every year on the holiday of Shavuot, we're making a conscious effort to say, I want to be a Jew. I have a clean slate. And I'm going to use this year, right, to show what it means to become a Jewish person. It's an interesting, reconfiguration of how we see ourselves. Yeah, Paul.
So if we're pure and without transgression on this holiday, there's no reason for a sin offering. That's the idea.
Correct. So look at Shavuot in the same way that we look at Yom Kippur. Shavuot is an opportunity for a renewal, for a moment to say, I'm rebalancing and I'm starting this year again. Judaism is a wonderful religion because it gives us so many opportunities to start over again, to say my past is yesterday, today is the new day, and with the beginning of Shavuot and the accepting of Torah and all that Torah represents, ve'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, I'm a new person. And if it doesn't work, Rosh Hashanah is right around the corner. I'll be able to do it again then.
Great text today.
All right. I'm sorry we spent so much time on the first text and not as much time on the second and third text, because I think I should have started with the second and third text. And then if we had time, go to the first text, because that was the most complicated. But there you have. Enjoy. Hopefully all of you will find something enriching to this holiday of Shavuot, the least celebrated holiday of the Jewish calendar, of the big ones. Maybe I will see some of you in classes this evening. I'm teaching at 9:30. I'm teaching about synesthesia. And synesthesia is the condition of combining senses. Like, so when I hear people, if I was a synesthete and you were talking, I would see colors, your senses are intertwined. And we're going to be looking at the story of Revelation through what it means to be a synesthete. But there's lots of good classes tonight, and hopefully some of you will be able to stay up long enough to enjoy them. That begins at 7:30. The first session, there's an opening session, and then 8:30, 9:30, and 10:30, 3 50-minute sessions. So yeah, Sandy.
People in a group I was chatting with last night asked in the cooking, the food sessions is there an expectation that people are cooking along with somebody who's preparing something?
Yeah, like in the shakshuka one, Hannah Estrin is going to be making shakshuka in her kitchen at home, and she is going to invite everybody else to make shakshuka with her.
Okay.
So I think that's why there was a list of ingredients.
Oh, was there? Okay, I did not see that. So,
Yeah.
okay, I didn't see it.
How many of you have never eaten shakshuka? Shame on you.
Wow, yeah.
Oh my
I don't
God.
I don't like spicy things. So,
It doesn't have to be spicy, but a good spicy shakshuka, there's nothing better.
but that's what people, when you go in a restaurant in Israel, that's spicy. So,
All right,
I
everybody.
love it.
Have a great holiday.
thank you very much.
and,
Chag Sameach, everybody.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, and I
Thank
will
you,
see
Rabbi.
you all hopefully either, if not tonight, tomorrow morning, and on Saturday morning for Yisker as part of our live stream.